Most people think that property investment works like this. You buy a house, fill it with tenants, you sit back, you live off the rent, and that sounds pretty good. But it's also completely wrong. Residential property in Australia is not a cash flow asset, it is a growth asset. Unlike many other countries, that's the reality. Most properties you buy in Australia will cost you money every month because in most suburbs, you can rent it cheaper than you can own it. And yet I bought my first house for $345,000. Today it's worth $820. My most recent purchase was $378,000. Today it's worth $850. Just those two properties alone have generated almost $1 million of equity for me in the last 5 years. And guess what? Still can't retire off them because equity doesn't pay the bills. Cash flow does. That is the piece of the puzzle that most investors never figure out. And that's why most people never build a property portfolio that actually can sustain them in retirement. I'm Corey Jones. I've helped hundreds of everyday Aussies generate over $100 million in equity in the last 5 years alone. Today, I'm going to break down the two-phase strategy that actually gets you to financial freedom faster, how to build the equity fast through property, and then convert that equity into cash flow that replaces your income for good. Now, firstly, many people believe that property investment's a great way to build wealth and retire. I completely agree. However, it doesn't happen how most people think. The idea that you're just going to go accumulate a portfolio, have the tenants move in, cover the cost, sit back and live off the rental income is an absolute dream. You're in fantasy land. That is not how this works. See, residential property in Australia, unlike most other countries, is not a cash flow asset, it is a growth asset. Most properties you're going to buy are going to be negatively geared, whether you like it or not, meaning the overall demand for that property in buying and not in renting, meaning most suburbs you can actually rent cheaper than you can to own. Now, as an investor, most properties are generally negative cash flow, particularly at the beginning. So the question is, why would we want to go buy a house that ends up losing money? The answer is growth. Let me give you an example. I bought my first house for $345,000 back in 2013. Today, that same property has a bank valuation of $820,000. One of the more recent houses that I bought was for $378,000. Today, that's worth $850,000. Just these two properties alone have made me about $1 million in equity. And guess what? Now that I've got that $1 million, I'm wealthy, but I've got no cash flow. I still can't retire off that. And if I don't have any cash flow, how the hell can I stop working? Now, when used correctly, residential property investment is a safe and effective strategy, understanding that what you're trying to achieve is growth and not asset. Now, as you continue to buy houses number 3, 4, 5, and so on, you can see how owning a large portfolio generates hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in equity. But again, you still can't squeeze the cash flow from that. That is not how you retire. Instead, what we do is we focus on phase 1 being about growth, and then phase 2 is about reinvesting that growth into cash flow assets. Now, we do not rely on tenants for income. We have one job for the tenant, and that is to drive down the debt. That is it. Inflation will also come to the party, and that will help decrease the value of that debt over time. Now, when these two things occur, the properties will become more and more positive cash flow, but you will never live off the cash flow. Instead, you'll use that cash flow to improve your servicing to keep buying more houses. There will become a point where you've got enough equity and enough stability. You can pull that equity out and start buying cash flow assets. For example, commercial property, hugely cash flow positive. Airbnb or tourist-based property, high dividend paying stocks, businesses, other assets that don't generally grow but give you huge cash flow returns. That is what you invest in phase 2. Let me give you an example. Let's say you had a $2 million investment portfolio with $1 million in equity. It's great that you're a millionaire, but if you can't retire, you're not exactly free. Now, if I go and use that $1 million of equity and reinvest that into a high generating cash flow asset that gives me a 10% return each year, that $1 million invested at 10% is now going to give me $100,000 in cash flow per year. Now, for the most part, for most Australians, that would actually replace your income. And that would mean you've now got the ability to not ever have to work again. But keep in mind, if I keep on investing and don't just stop at the 1, you can see how this is going to cascade and snowball in a very big way. Now, if I was to scale this up and I've got a $2 or a $3 million property portfolio that I still owe that $1 million, I've got the ability to now invest in 4 or 5 different high cash flow assets. And again, if I've got $2 million in equity invested at a 10% cash flow return, that's $200,000 a year. That is more income than most Australians earn. If I do this with 3 or 4 or $5 million of my own equity, of my money that I've earned, and I invest that at a 10% cash flow, I'm making literally $500,000 a year in cash. Coming from multiple asset classes, completely unreliable to your income and what your residential property portfolio is paying you in cash flow. This, guys, is true freedom. This is how every wealthy investor actually lives off their portfolio. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you can't go and buy 10 houses and pay them off to zero, then go and live off the rent. What I'm saying is if you actually want to do that, is going to take you like 50 to 70 friggin' years. Now, I'm not interested in that, and neither are our clients. I want my clients' incomes replaced in 10 years or less, so they can choose what they want to do with their time while they're still young, while they've still got energy, while they've still got young kids. That way they can focus on the things they love doing and stop doing that job they hate, and they can go make their own difference on the planet. That, guys, is true freedom. Now, I hope that all makes sense to you all. If you've got any questions, please put them in the comments and I will respond. I hope you can take that two-phase strategy and implement it for yourself. You make way more money, way faster, way more efficiently, and way safer. I hope it helps.